Ladies and gentlemen, console wars have always been stupid. Yes, folks, your eyes are not deceiving you. After over 5 years of making fun of PlayStation 5 because of its design, I am now proudly the proud owner of a plastic taco. This thing is massive, and this is the so-called slim version. Maybe it's good that I waited. Anyways, that's just gonna look weird the whole video. Try not to hide behind it. So it's overtime season, and I picked myself up a PS5 after a healthy chunk of overtime because there are some games that are on the PlayStation service but not on the Xbox service, and a few other things as well. Plus, I wanted to just send a very, very clear message that the whole console war thing is just stupid. It's always been stupid, and considering I grew up with the classic console wars that all those revisionist internet nerds base their console fanboyism on, who better than to set this straight on how console wars have always been stupid? I really hate to be the bearer of such terrible news, but what we consider console fanboyism is actually quite the Johnny-come-lately when you think about it. Let's think about console wars and, classic console wars. Where did all this crap come from? I know that probably the classic console war that so many people with their revisionist history on the internet point back to is Super Nintendo versus Sega Genesis in the early 90s, with the whole Genesis does what Nintendo don't, which was technically Genesis versus NES, but you had the Genesis does what Nintendo don't, you had the edgy advertising by Sega, and then later on when Super Nintendo started to really throw its muscle around, you had the Play It Loud era, but that was probably the classic console war that a lot of folks that are screeching at each other on the internet will point to. I can tell you as someone who grew up in that so-called console war that was 100% marketing. Sega, because they were trying to differentiate themselves from Nintendo, Sega was trying to basically be the more grown-up console, so to speak. Nintendo has always had this kid thing attached to it, which included us back in the day, by the way. I was one of those Nintendo kids who watched the TV shows, ate the breakfast cereal, had the NES, SNES, and N64, and got made fun of for the third one. But the whole thing with Nintendo is that it's always been like trying to be family friendly, like the Disney of video game systems. So the competitors would try to appeal to older folks. And let me tell you, the 90s were a wonderful time for absolutely super cringy advertisements targeting Generation X youngsters during the Beavis and Butthead era. Sega's edgy advertising during the 90s was no exception to that. I mean, you look at some of this stuff and it is so tacky. Like, oh, look, some baby boomer marketing executive wants to be hip to the young folks or something, and so they try to act like a Gen X, but, just get all cringy instead. It's like the ancestor of that "how we doing, fellow kids" meme with the old guy with the backward hat and the skateboard. But during the early 90s with Nintendo versus Super Nintendo versus Genesis, that was just something that existed in the wonderful world of marketing. It was just something you saw in commercials. You went over a friend's house and they had the other console, you played the other console. I had a Super Nintendo at home, still have that Super Nintendo to this day, all worn out and yellow bottomed that it is, but if I went over a friend's house and they had a Genesis, I played Genesis. I didn't sit there with my arms folded. Matter of fact, one time I brought over an Atari controller and played one from my 7800 and played Sonic the Hedgehog with one of those horrendously uncomfortable Atari 7800 joysticks. So, I mean, you just played whatever your friends had. The whole idea of a console war and egging each other for what specifically we played was really not a thing. Just whatever they had for video games, you played it. If they still had regular Nintendo, as we called it back then, you played that. They had Atari, you played that. They had Genesis, you played that. It's just simple. The whole console war of the 90s that people romanticize or whatever, in some other way distort, was basically not a thing. Fast forward to the late 90s, and we had PlayStation versus Nintendo 64. Now, I got made fun of for having the N64 because it took cartridges, it was more the kiddie toy, and that was kind of legit because I knew of some very scared moms that wouldn't buy a PlayStation for their kids because they're gonna scratch the CDs. So there was some merit to that, but I can tell you that the so-called console war, whatever you want to call it, just wasn't a thing in the late 90s either. Yeah, I mean, you'd get egged by PlayStation folks for having an N64 or whatever, or we'd make fun of the PlayStation people for their load times and their games could actually scratch. But bottom line, when push came to shove, same rules as in the early 90s. You played whatever your friend had. I mean, it's just, I took the heat for having the kiddie toy N64 from the PlayStation folks in my high school. But, and they're like, oh, PlayStation has unlimited graphics because we have games on CD. I think they meant to say they could take up unlimited storage space because of swappable media, but we'll just roll with it. But anyways, yeah, I took the heat from the PlayStation fanboys in my high school, if you could even call them that. It was kind of just more ribbing and egging than some of the venom you see thrown around on the internet today. But here's the thing. My senior year in high school, Skills USA had a charity fast where we stayed at the school on the weekend for 40 hours, like hanging out, playing video games and drinking water or whatever. It was a 40-hour fast with pledges and stuff like that. And guess what? We wheeled in the AV carts from the classrooms and hooked up PlayStations and N64s. And guess what happened when we hooked up the N64? The PlayStation fanboys of my era played and enjoyed Smash Brothers, GoldenEye, Mario Kart 64, Mario Party, those N64 classics, as we'd call them today, because I'm old. All of a sudden, the whole PlayStation crap being better than Nintendo just completely went away, and they played, 4-player multiplayer on the tube TVs, on the television carts we had in the schools back then. And, of course, some folks played PlayStation for, like, Gran Turismo and stuff along those lines. But by and large, when it was finally time for those PlayStation elitists who were better than us to play the kiddie toy N64, they played it and they enjoyed it. Discussion over. So, yeah, these people didn't believe in jack squat. And it was still a far, 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 far cry from some of the garbage you see on the internet nowadays. Now, you would think, with the arrival of the new millennium, that in college there would be a whole bunch of PlayStation fanboys with the launch of the PlayStation 2. I have some very fond memories of watching my friends play Grand Theft Auto 3 in Vice City, or someone brought in a PS2 they got on launch. Wow, must have been fun having money, and hooked it up to one of the classroom projectors with my fellow AV geeks, and we played life-size Tekken on the classroom wall. But you would think there'd be a whole bunch of fanboy stuff because PlayStation 2 is absolutely dominant, but we didn't care. There were some people who still had N64s, myself included at one point. There were people that still had PS1s. There were people that had GameCubes. There were people that had Xboxes. Nobody really cared. You just played whatever your friend had. See, isn't it amazing that in the wonderful world before social media, that you just played whatever your friend had? You didn't egg them mercilessly for what piece of plastic they have. No, you want to know when the whole console war or even platform war thing really started to spring up? When did I start noticing it myself? And I'm sure there's others that can relate. Xbox 360, with the arrival of social media and MySpace. And I first noticed it with Elder Scrolls Oblivion, when Elder Scrolls Oblivion players who were playing on PC were like, the Xbox kids are getting the games watered down so they can play on console. And that's really, I mean, when social media and quick updates and something resembling what we now call X, formerly Twitter, became a thing, that's when you started seeing some of the serious venom being tossed around. Now we got a whole generation of people who grew up trolling on the internet. Now they're sitting at home with no life, and they're just flipping out because, oh no, a PlayStation 5 game might go over to Xbox. Whoa. PC gaming has gone a lot more mainstream, and now there's also mobile to contend with as well. But what we have for console fanboyism is just plain stupid. And you know what? It has always been stupid. These people are playing revisionist with gaming history just so they can cry and whine over the internet. They're not worth your time. They're not worth messing around with. They're not worth anything, because they are just throwing common sense completely out the window and being completely belligerent and militantly ignorant of the march of technology. Steam has upended the industry as we know it. PC gaming is in all kinds of other places besides some beige office computer, in some corner, in some room of your house. In the wonderful world of the Steam Deck and some of the blending of form factors and stuff like that. Really, console fanboyism is a relic of the not-so-good old days of the internet that some people just don't want to die. That's just all there is to it. I've been a PC gamer for a quarter century, but with the arrival of 1080-60 on consoles, I am more than happy to get back into what these things can do. And, of course, I got the Xbox at a discount sale or whatever back a couple of years ago, but now with a little bit of overtime, I finally have a PlayStation. I can play catch-up on stuff, and also, stuff from the PlayStation Store. Now that PlayStation is becoming more of a platform than a chunk of plastic, it'd be really nice to have a collection of stuff on PlayStation side, and so I can know what I'm talking about and not look like a clueless fanboy. Who only bought one of the two major competitors. Nintendo Switch 2, don't know when I'll get into that, or if I'll ever do anything with Nintendo again because of how they're behaving these days. But at least when it comes to Xbox, PlayStation, and PC through Steam, GOG, and the others, I like to know what I'm talking about, and I intend on knowing what I'm talking about, and I intend on making the investment in order to definitely know what I'm talking about. Unfortunately, though, I will not be paying Sony $55 for pieces of plastic. I will black out my console with silicone covers. Thank you, Amazon, for... But that's another discussion. So yeah, console wars is stupid. They've always been stupid. They will always be stupid, and they're on their way to being obsolete. It's time to chill out, take a deep breath, play some damn games. Because, performance mode on PlayStation or Xbox is cool. The real graphics mode is to get into PC gaming and crank the graphics on more powerful hardware. But however you play your games, play them and enjoy them. Because fanboyism was, is, and always will be completely stupid. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay signing off. Thanks for stopping by.
Let's just relax and play some games.